Reach Higher provides authentic content with a global perspective, guiding students to learn English while learning about the world and themselves. Reach Higher aims to enhance vocabulary, phonics, reading, writing, and conversation skills, all that is geared towards developing critical thinking, problem solving, and analytical skills. Scan the QR code or directly visit eltngl.com/Reach Higher series to access audio,
Now, sing along with
keywords lists, teacher's book, assessment resources, and so much more. Start using Reach Higher to experience the integration of academic language, literacy, and content in English education.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Van Vlack, and I'm a professor in the master's program of TESOL at Sookmyung Women's University. I've been there since the start of the program in 2000, sorry. So this is our 20th anniversary, celebrating that. My background, for the most part, is originally in theoretical linguistics, and for 26 years now, I have been a language teacher and a teacher training. So what I want to do today is I want to talk a little bit about our current situation and what we can learn from the current situation and how we can move forward into the future. So the title of this is Rediscovering Interaction Through Online Language Classes, Blended Learning as a Way Forward. And I think the title kind of explains. We have a few keywords there, interaction. And as we're going to find, interaction should be seen as being pivotal in any kind of language learning class, and I'll try to explain why. And also blended learning as a possible model that we can use to go forward. So let's jump into this and see how we do. So first, the advent of readily accessible technologies, cultural and societal changes, and of course our friend COVID-19 have all led to a burgeoning use of online learning and teaching. And you'll notice I kind of use the words teaching and learning kind of together. And I always use those together because we have to think about from what we teach and what we do, what our students may learn. And in particular, we're looking for additional languages. So the teaching of additional languages, so English in Korea, something like that, where we're assuming it's an additional language and not a first language because these are different situations. They're different situations. So the presentation looks at online learning and teaching at an additional language with a specific focus on interaction, as I've mentioned. So on the basis of usage-based models. So if you remember, I said my background is in theoretical linguistics, so I think this has informed a lot of the choices I make as a teacher and as a teacher trainer, and one of the key ideas that I'm kind of cued into in theory is this idea of usage-based models. And according to usage-based models, interaction is an absolutely necessary component in the language learning process. But as we well know, interaction may not always be the main focus within language learning. Even before all online education and everything else, interaction sometimes falls by the wayside, and in particular, with the advent and required, oftentimes, required use of online teaching tools, interaction kind of gets thrown out the window. And I think this is an opportunity. In many ways, I feel at this moment in time, that we're kind of in a war setting as far as teaching goes. I feel like we're struggling to kind of put things together. We're operating under conditions that we feel are strange and challenging, but like any war setting, afterwards, it's going to lead to change. And we want to see this positively and think about how we can take what we're learning now and change what we do in the future, and that's the main impetus And that's my main goal for trying to look at this, as a way of refocusing, gathering energy, and reanalyzing what we think should be done, but also how we can do it. So if we kind of get back to this, we also know that interaction is difficult to interact. Even in face-to-face classes, it's not always easy to get interactions functioning well. And I teach a course with my graduate students where the focus is specifically on this. So I have some experience trying to make this work, and that's kind of what I'll be bringing into this. But we know that interaction is then particularly difficult in fully online settings. It can be very difficult to interact for a lot of different reasons. So the presentation therefore looks at rationales for interaction first. We need to know why we need to do interactions and why they're so important. So we'll look at the rationales for this, and also the aspects of interaction that we need to think about, and challenges related to the effective use of interaction in these fully online classes. And that's kind of what I'm kind of addressing here, as we'll see soon. So the presentation therefore looks at, we've already done that. It sets a rationale for making the efforts to base or at least integrate interactions into online lessons. And if we're not going to base our lessons on interactions, at least we need to find ways to integrate them into our lessons. And also offers suggestions for how to set up and manage these interactions in popular online tools, such as Zoom. And a lot of these tools function in very similar ways. So hopefully my experience has predominantly been with Zoom, but I think that all these other kind of tools kind of function in similar ways. So hopefully that will be helpful. So let's look at blended learning. And as I mentioned in the introduction, we're using blended learning as a kind of model for what we might want to do. So we want to look at blended learning as opposed to fully online learning, and how we can actually blend blended learning into fully online settings that we're kind of increasingly required to do now, and which probably will not go away once we've overcome COVID. These online settings are not going to go away, because there are certain advantages to that as well, as we'll see. So models for blended learning. There are so many models for blended learning that nobody really agrees exactly how to define blended learning, and there are dozens and dozens of different models. Some, theorists, right? We all have tons of different models, so we don't need to get tied up into that. But we can look at a basic definition of blended learning as an approach to teaching that involves integrating different modes or processes into the curriculum. So we're trying to do a bunch of different things, and we're blending different things. And that means different modes. And chiefly, that mode has been, for us, integrating kind of online web-based resources. In classrooms, people do this different ways. They have different stations within the classroom. They have all these different models for blended learning, but we're mostly interested in ones that integrate classroom face-to-face kind of experiences with sort of online experiences. And this is what I've been doing for a long, long time. So the model of blended learning that I've been using is best defined as kind of an enrichment program, where I have my face-to-face class with my students, but they have things that they need to do coming into the class that are provided online, and then they have things they need to do coming out of the class that are provided online. So we have kind of the face-to-face is kind of in the center, and then we have these things like preparation and all these other things that kind of prepare them for that. And the basic idea of enrichment is to get the best possible performance from the students. And this comes from my background in assessment. And I've been involved in a lot of assessment for productive tasks. So speaking and writing assessment primarily. And the general rule in speaking and writing assessment is that if you have not created a situation where the test taker can give her best possible performance, then the test lacks validity. There's no validity to that test. And that's something that we want to bring into the classroom. If we are having our students do things in the class, we need to make sure that they can give their best possible performance, because that's when you learn the most, right? Contrary to several ideas where we would like to see people learn from their failures and these types of things. Yes, people learn from failures, but they should also be given opportunities to succeed more than anything else. And this is what underlies kind of my philosophy in doing blended learning, that the things the students do leading into the class prepare them for their class performance. The things they do coming out of class solidify and let them think about and learn more from what they've actually done during the class. So it's a way of heightening class experiences. So when I lesson plan, as we see within my lesson plans, everything focuses on this in-class experience where students are engaged in a variety of interactions within class. And by doing this, I can raise efficacy, students can learn more, and it also changes their opinions and their ideas about language and language learning, which I think is very important. Also affects identity, which we'll come into in a moment. So in this blended learning, we're looking at the perceived strengths of online situations as well as perceived strengths of face-to-face kind of interactional in the classroom kind of strengths. And what we're interested in doing here is how we can take this model and put it somehow all online, since that's what we're required to do. So lots of people have looked at, and there's been lots of discussion, particularly of late because of our situation, about the advantages of online learning. You'll go online and you'll find tons and tons of articles, theoretical articles, as well as kind of more practical guidelines to what some of the strengths are. So just to review those, one of the main strengths, I think particularly for me, is this idea of multimodal content. We can show videos, we can use pictures, we can do all these things online that are always not so easy to do in the classroom, right? Bringing in pictures, you're printing out pictures and handing them all out, and it takes a lot of paper and it takes a lot of time. So we can do a lot of multimodal content, which is good. Things that provide some connection with the real world, which classrooms don't always have. So that's a big advantage. People have cited temporal flexibility. So when you load things up, so when I load things up going into my class, students can go and look at it as many times as they want. They can review, they can preview, they can do it 10 times, they can do it no times, they can do it at 2 in the morning. Since I have adult students teaching at university, I can actually see what time they look at this material, and 3 in the morning they're there watching this, because I guess that's when they're awake. Shouldn't be, but they're awake at that time. So there's temporal flexibility. There's also pacing. So for students whose levels are different, they can all make use of the material in their own way. So it's a way of dealing with multi-level classes, which I think we all have. I don't think there's a class out there that isn't multi-level, and that's not a reason to necessarily despair. Especially with this, students can, some look at it faster, some look at it slower. I have some students, they'll translate every single word in the material, and they ask questions, and they have all sorts of strategies. So they can do all sorts of different things, which relates to flexibility and learning styles. Again, students can figure their way through this material that you've posted up and in advance. And these are some of the advantages of online material that we're posting up and we're making available, whether it's videos we make, instructional videos for the students, or YouTube videos, stories that we post up, text for them to read, all these different things. So it deals with learners in a group, but they deal with it individually. And of course, as the teacher, you can help guide that process and set them up for that. So there are a lot of positive aspects to a lot of these online materials. So I'm not here to say that online is bad, because it's certainly not. There's a lot of positive things there. But we know that when it comes to actually interacting, online can be very, very difficult. It can be very, very challenging. And that's where some of the weaknesses lie. So let's go and look a little bit about why interactions are important, since I've been harping on interactions. So why are they so important? So we can see them as being pivotal to the general language learning process, regardless of theories. So we have all different sorts of theoretical ideas about language, but all those different theories kind of see interaction as being at the basis of language learning, even though there is a specific sort of theory about language learning that are interactional approaches. But I don't think anyone would say that interaction is not important, no matter what their background is. It's a matter of when we do it and everything else, but it's still very important. So we can conceive of interactions in different ways. And again, different theories look at interactions in different ways, and we can look at language socialization and all these different things. But the basic idea is that interactions create a socially guided kind of process in which people are able to appropriate language, make the language around them their own, and then start using that. And that forms the basis of language learning, this general idea of appropriation, where people appropriate the language around them. And you might ask at this point, well, if people are watching a video, they can also appropriate language. But as we're going to see sort of coming up on the next slide, it doesn't always work exactly that way. Watching a video and interacting with a person is a different thing. So we need these interactions as kind of the basis. And in some ways, we can think of this in relation to Swain's output hypothesis, which is very famous. It's old, but people are familiar with it. So we can look at interactions as maybe through, or at least being part of, the output hypothesis that I know people are familiar with, which focuses on the responses. And someone says something, you say something, and you can sort of feel how successful your speech has been based on someone's response. You can self-regulate, and you hear yourself, and your own output becomes your own input, and all these ideas from output that kind of highlight and focus on how important these types of interactions will be. By hearing ourselves, and also the visceral reactions from others. Looks on their face, and I don't understand what you're talking about, or something like that. And that's just the basis of it. We don't want to get too technical. I could spend the rest of the time talking about interactions, but I will spare you that, and I won't. We'll just assume that interactions, and all these different theories, interactions are pivotal, and we want to move forward. On this idea then, it's interactions to set up and maintain settings where a large number of these interactions occur. And we need to think, you might think, okay, I have lots of interactions with my students. So teacher interacts with students. Well, teacher-student interactions are generally weird. And there's been a lot of studies on this. Birmingham studies starting in the 1970s about classroom interactions. And classroom interactions are simply not typical of the types of interactions that people have in the real world. What's this? Oh, how do you know that? Where teachers are always asking students questions that everyone knows the answer to, and there's very little purpose to these things, right? There's a pedagogical purpose for the teacher, but for the student, there's not much going on. So thinking about interactions, we need different types of interactions, not just teacher-student interactions where the teacher is teaching, because with the idea of appropriation, that's not something for the students to appropriate. They can't be teachers. There's a power distance. So the language that the teacher actually produces and the way that the teacher produces that language is probably not language that students are ever going to be able to use unless they become teachers. So we think we're modeling and we're being a good source of input, but yeah, to a certain extent, but maybe not as much as we think, because students need all sorts of different types of interactions to be able to appropriate language that they can actually go and use. So let's backtrack even a little bit more and just think about the context that I'm kind of putting this in, because context affects everything and everything is affected by context. So ideas about language that we need to think about. First, the goals of language learning. And I'm not sure that teachers always think enough about this, their goals of language learning. Are your goals to develop analytical competence where students are able to analytically investigate language? That seems to be a very large goal for a lot of my students, especially as they get older. The goal shifts from language into analysis, and everyone's busy analyzing. Or are you trying to build a system? Are you trying to build a functional system, a system that's actually able to be used? And that's what I mean by a functional system. And people may argue, oh, we can do both. First we analyze and then we build the system. There's a fundamental disconnect between being able to analyze something and being able to do it. Analysis is not necessarily system building. And if we're going to do any of these things, the analysis should come after the system has been built, not necessarily before. And these might come about as a result between, let's say, conflicts between first language learning and second language learning, and taking first language models and ignoring them to a certain extent. The second thing we want to think about is authenticity in modes. So we have spoken forms and written forms, and they are fundamentally different. Some linguists actually would go so far as to say that we have two types of English. We have spoken English and written English, and they are separate languages. Because if you think about it, the vocabulary that you use in speaking is very different than the vocabulary that you use in writing. The concerns in speaking are very different than the concerns in writing. Yet, and I think if you think about this, you might agree with me, generally, second language learning focuses entirely on writing. We start with writing, we think about writing. Anything we do at speaking comes from writing, not from speaking. That we don't teach our students interactions. That we have within the classroom, and we're thinking about interactions, we have interactions that we do in the task to kind of get our task done, and we have interactions that we need to have for the task. And we focus on these in-task, kind of what are the language they need to do this, but we don't think about how the language they need to actually just talk to each other and share information and all these things, because we're kind of fixated on written forms. When I teach things like pronunciation to my students, it's very hard to get them to stop thinking about written forms, because everything they think about in relation to speaking comes from written forms. So we need to think about the authenticity, particularly of spoken forms, and how we can approach speaking authentically. And that means without writing. When you speak, normally, you don't think about writing. You don't think about what the words look like. You only need to know what they sound like and how to put these things together. And fundamentally, writing is a decontextualized system. Speaking has to take place as a reaction to context. So their function is very different. And therefore, their forms are very different, which again, classroom interactions tend to be very different than interactions in a church, which tend to be very different than interactions in let's say, a baseball game. The context sets the tone for all these different things, and that's very important. So we need to think about the authenticity of these modes. So if you're teaching speaking with your students, are you really dealing with speaking? Or are you dealing with writing out loud? Something to think about. And the last thing, language as pattern-based versus rule-based. And again, this is one of these interesting things. If you talk to almost any researcher in language, they will say that language is pattern-based and not rule-based. But then everything they say after that relates to learning language rules. So we contradict ourselves a lot on this. We're so fixated on the idea of language being rule-based which kind of goes back to this whole analytical idea, which is what researchers do and teachers do sometimes, but learners don't necessarily need to do that. And again, I could spend a lot of time talking about the difference between pattern-based and rule-based, but I'll try to get through this quickly. The brain does not learn rules separately from patterns. People learn patterns first, and from the patterns, rules, general observations percolate up from what we can call exemplars, examples of patterns. And generalizations kind of work up there. That's simply how the brain works. But it doesn't go the other way, typically. Right? You're given a rule and then, oh, let me find the examples. It generally doesn't work that way. So this whole kind of deductive way of teaching runs contrary to how brains typically work, and particularly a system like language. Because language is different, and we must acknowledge that language is different than math or science or history, these other things. It's a fundamentally different subject, because without language, there is no math, science, or history. It's integrated and it functions in our brain in a very, very different way. And what we need to do is get our students to learn patterns before rules can somehow be figured out. But rules are never rules. They are just stronger patterns rather than being absolute rules. Give me any rule and I will show you counterexamples.
Reading Explorer 3rd edition is a 6-level reading series that prepares learners for academic success. It provides real-world stories, captivating learners to audiovisually travel around the world as they read texts and watch related videos. Visit Cengage and Language World's website via link provided below to check out all the supplementary materials such as Teacher's Guide, word lists, audios and videos,
is Dr. Jim.
syllabus, lesson plans, and video scripts. With Reading Explorer, prepare your students to be effective and critical readers.
So hopefully that's given us an idea of a context for where I'm coming from in looking at this and why interactions are so important. As we move through, we're looking at perspective in input processing, and I sort of foreshadowed this a little bit earlier, but in essence, information processing is affected by contextual conditions. That shouldn't be a surprise, right? That the way we perceive things around us is affected by where we are, who we are, all these different elements of context. And that determines how we see things. So if we take a simple example, I'm here in this room, and there's actually a nice audience here, and we're all sitting here in Korea doing this. Because we're doing this and we're in a certain place, you're processing this information in a certain way. Your brain has kind of set up for this, and you're noticing certain things, and you're thinking about this, and this is making a certain impression on you that you're recording. But if we were in another country, I would probably mention these things a little bit differently. If we weren't in this situation, maybe after this, we decide to go have lunch, then we're going to process this information differently. It's always going to be based on the situation we're in and the context. So how one processes information then in turn has a profound effect on how the information is encoded in memory. So the way that you process the information determines how it's actually stored in memory. So if we think about this in the classroom, students will store information that they've learned in the classroom in the way that they've learned it. That's very, very simple, but a very powerful idea that we need to bear in mind, particularly when we're thinking about interactions and the way that we present input and this whole online thing. So one thing that we want to think about, inside versus outside perspectives. So typically with online education, and we look at the advantages of online, almost all that puts the student on the outside. They're on the outside looking in. They're a consumer of whatever you've given them, the video, the picture, all these different things. And they're expected to kind of consume that in a passive way on the outside. They don't necessarily need to respond, or even if they're responding, the responses are only for themselves. It's not a meaningful kind of interactional response. Oh, well, run and point to the blue, something blue in your room. In the real world, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? And it puts people on the outside. The whole idea of interactions is it takes people from the outside and brings them on the inside. When you know, so if this audience now, if all of a sudden I tell them, you have to respond, and I'm going to start giving you questions, and you need to respond to these things, all of a sudden you're going to start processing this information very, very differently, because you know that there's going to be a response. And part of classroom interactions is the student responds, and then that's the end of it. But in the real world, response follows response follows response. We get a chain of responses in what are called adjacency pairs. And this changes the perspective. One, you need to think carefully about what people are saying. You need to think about what you're saying and then what you're going to say next. It's an entirely different process that puts you on the inside rather than always being on the outside where you're just taking stuff but never putting back. That's kind of strange in many ways. And this also sets the identity for our students. Sets the identity for them where they're always just passive learners and they're never really users of English. My students, university and graduate students, even them, when I ask them about their identity in English, almost all of them see themselves as learners of English, even though they've learned English for sometimes 15 or 20 years. And they're very good at using it, but they never see themselves as users because they're always put and very often put in these kind of passive positions. So interactions are very important for bringing people inside the language fold. And the reality in the world right now is that the vast majority of English speakers are additional language speakers of English. They eclipse multifold the monolingual English speakers of English, but we're all equal. And students need to be aware of that. The other thing is that we want to see language as functionally driven, because in life, everything we do has a reason. If you don't have a reason to do something, what do? Nothing. You've lost all hope, right? It's called chronic depression, right? You stay in bed all day because you have why would I get out of bed? I have nothing to do. So we need to make these interactions useful, to make them real. There needs to be a function driving them. There needs to be a purpose, and not the purpose for the teacher, right? We have all sorts of purposes as teachers. It has to be a purpose for the students because we're concerned about their behavior, not ours so much, right? Our behavior as teachers is important, but the students learn much more from their own behavior than from our behavior. So we want to make sure that things are functionally driven. So here are some challenges for interactions in online settings. First, minimize context. So we've said that all speaking and listening and everything else, since we look at these things together, it's all based on context, but in these online settings, context is minimal. Even if we've kind of built it up, at that moment, everyone is sitting in a different place and they're all just a box, and we're staring at boxes, and it's hard to share context. We can send them things, and I do this with my students. I send them files and I send pictures and we file share to try to build the context. But it's still not the same because there's still that feeling like, I'm sitting at home. There's still that detachment. So it's something that we need to try to deal with as best we can. But the context will always be minimized. There's the synchronicity. In real interactions, people talk on top of each other. They don't take turns. How are you doing today? I'm fine. How are you? and everyone takes these nice turns. That's not how people actually speak. That's again, this lack of authenticity. In the real world, people are all talking at the same time. But I've noticed in my Zoom sessions, students don't do that. And when it happens, everyone stops like they've been struck by lightning. And they all get embarrassed and their faces turn red and they feel like they've somehow ruined our class. But that's actually what I want them to do. But people are hyper aware of their use during these things because their box lights up and they feel like they're in the spotlight, and they get much more nervous than they normally would in a classroom where it's noisy and everyone's talking and everyone's kind of busy. So it becomes this kind of ding, 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 very synchronous, kind of somewhat contrived kind of problem. There's minimized sharing capabilities in any of these platforms. Yes, we can allow, as the leader, you can allow other people to share, but people don't always share equally, and they have different opportunities. If you have younger learners, then they're going to have a lot of difficulty actually sharing things the same way. Like, here, load up this file. And how does a kid know how to load up a file and send a file share? And here, send me a link to a Google Doc. And yeah, it's going to be hard. So a lot of the sharing kind of comes from me, and it's directed by me. And again, that's not necessarily what I want. One of the biggest problems I've faced is inflexibility in grouping. I can make groups, but I can't take a group and split another group without great difficulty. And it takes ages, and half the time it doesn't work, right? There's always someone floating around in no group. So we have a lot of difficulty with grouping, because I think grouping should be flexible, but it's difficult, and I've been trying to work out techniques for doing this with minimal, well, some success. Students are more nervous, so their affect in general, students are more nervous and less willing to communicate, particularly in whole groups, like in a whole class setting. And that's generally true, but in sort of online settings, it seems even more true. Because again, depending on the setting that they have set up, whoever is speaking, their box gets huge or it lights up. So people become very, very self-conscious of being stared at and all these things. So it's very hard to be subtle. Everything is very overt. As I mentioned, teachers need to do everything. So the teachers have to facilitate all these things, and it's hard for the students to self-facilitate. When I do all these interactions in my regular face-to-face class, sometimes the students end up being the best teachers in the class by being able to take over and facilitate after they've seen me model these things for a certain number of weeks. But in Zoom, I haven't seen that happen yet, where students kind of take over and they start facilitating. They stay very passive. And the last thing is feedback. In an interactional type of setting, feedback is going to be a key mechanism for how your students are going to be able to gauge how well they're doing. And because people are more sensitive, because everything is very overt, I can't simply whisper to one student, oh, you could have done this, because then everyone hears me. I can't subtly give feedback for one student that nobody else hears. Everyone cues in. The second I say something, my window lights up, and everyone stops talking and they listen. And that's very bad for giving feedback. So there's different, obviously we have to find different ways to try to give feedback. So we can see these kind of challenges within online settings of dealing with interactions. But there are some ways forward. And I've been experimenting with these, for a long time in face-to-face classes, but of course new challenges faced with doing this online. But the first thing is always building familiarity and trust, and letting students know you and start to trust you, and not just you, but other students. And that means giving them things where they can kind of work together, co-construct, and build and experience things together. They need to start being comfortable. And if we can, to use a crash-in term, lower their affective filter, which I think most people are aware of, It's absolutely true. We need to get people just comfortable with each other. And the best way to do that is by doing things, by doing different things. And it's worth your time, even just having your students do goofy things, right? Sing and do these different things. And if you do it first, you'd be surprised what your students will do. Even adult students, I found over the years, adult students will do anything that younger kids will do. It doesn't go the other way around. Kids can't do everything adults will do, but adults will do everything young kids do. They'll jump up and down, they roll on the floor. You can get them to do all sorts of things once they've built trust in you and in their fellow classmates. And that's essential. And right now, this is the 8th week of the semester, and I've been really focusing on this in my class with my undergraduates, not my teacher training class, but class with undergraduates. And we're getting to that point where they're starting to trust each other, they can start reading each other's minds, they're talking on top of each other, they're starting to do this through this kind of familiarity. But it all comes from the next thing, which I think is the crucial part, task development. We need to create tasks for our students, tasks where they are achieving goals together. And these are sometimes pedagogical tasks, but largely real-world type tasks, where we take and you can call them role plays, but maybe simulations is a better word. We simulate real-world situations, and students go about trying to deal with real-world situations. So an example would be something like creating a news report, where students have to go out, they have to interview each other, they create the background for the news report, they take notes, they invent this whole thing in the scenario, and then each of them then records their own report, or they do it in pairs, or something like that, where they're working together, and they're building towards these things, and it's things that relate to the real world that have a clear function, where we're doing these kind of simulations. And when we start doing these, it kind of forces people to kind of work together where they're not thinking as much just about the language and about being correct, but in getting something done and really pushing them to get these things done, because we have all different levels. So different people will get these things done in different ways, but the key is getting it done. So it's building these types of tasks where they have to use a lot of language in the task, but also for the task, and build this kind of connection between students. When they've done something together, then that creates kind of a bond by doing these things together. And if I'm there scaffolding them, helping them, giving them feedback, that creates a big bond with me as well, where they begin to trust me instead of just worrying that I'm going to evaluate them, which is the perspective they come into in the beginning of the class. They're terrified to talk in front of me because they're afraid that I'm going to evaluate everything they say and, oh, you didn't do that right, minus point, or something like that. That it's about facilitating language use rather than just evaluating them as they're going and making sure they understand that. Obviously, being competent in the platforms that you're using and knowing the tricks and figuring out how to do different things. So all the different things, you can text in Zoom and you can do all these other little things. You can let students take over. There's all sorts of different little tricks you can do to try to give them some stakes in doing this. So knowing well how the platform works, like I said, for grouping, grouping in Zoom doesn't seem to work very well. So I pre-make the groups, but then of course, when time comes and I push the button, that never works. So I have to do it all manually. So now I have the students come a little bit early and I get them all in the groups. And grouping has been a major problem that I'm trying to kind of to work through. But certainly pre-making the groups and working out how you can do the grouping and moving people around. People fly out of Zoom all the time, so you have to keep the window open and get them back in their group the second they disappear and re-enter, get them back into the group. So being competent with the platform is going to be very, very important. And realizing there are a lot of kind of cool, useful kind of things in there, as well as things that you just need to learn to control better. And of course, preparation. Preparing, and that mostly means the lesson planning. Designing these tasks and building these tasks in a way. And again, what I do is I have tasks that the students do on their own to prepare for the class. We come to class, they perform, and then I have another task they do on their own outside of the class. And they get feedback on all of these things. So they get feedback coming in, they get feedback in the class, and then of course they get feedback going out of the class. And that's kind of the evaluation comes in the post-task that they do outside the class. They don't get evaluated in the class because that's not the type of feedback. I give facilitative feedback rather than kind of evaluative type of feedback. And I think that's key to kind of, again, building familiarity and trust. That's really important. And then moving to the conclusions where we're coming to the end. So I hope it should be clear that interactions play a pivotal role in the learning of a language and as a functional system. So we're going with this idea, right? Again, if we're still stuck in the idea of analysis, then interactions will play a minor role in the analysis. But if we're looking at language as a functional system, interactions are the basis for language learning. Because we have to remember, language is first and foremost a spoken thing. Writing is very much secondary. And yeah, it's important to learn writing. And writing is important for an educated person. But the basis of language is speaking. And writing is built on top of speaking. It forms out of what we have as far as the spoken language goes. With this in mind, then interactions are really kind of very, very important. I think this is an opportunity where we're kind of pushed into doing all these online classes, and usually the first thing to get wiped is the interactional element. But this is an opportunity for us to rediscover something that we need to kind of bring back in, and it's opportunity to make things better when we emerge from COVID. And we can start doing more different things. But we can't wait because, unfortunately, we don't know how much longer this is going to go on. A few more months, a year, we just don't know. And we can't just abandon our students because of COVID. We have to find ways to try to make this work. And by doing these things, we hopefully find ways that we'll continue to do when we come out to heighten and make our teaching better. So it seems like teachers should make a serious effort to get their students to interact in a variety of different ways. And that means bigger groups, smaller groups, parts where different students have different roles, making sure that everyone interacts within these things by giving them roles and making sure that people can't just sit back and watch, because that's what students are used to doing very much, is sitting back and watching. We have to make sure they not only have to get involved, but that they want to get involved by developing tasks that should need to be completed and that they want to complete, something interesting for them and something that's meaningful, that gives a clear function and will then get them to get involved and behave. It should be clear from our experience with online teaching that setting up and affecting interactions is often a challenge. But it's a challenge we have to kind of embrace and keep on working with. And this is what I've been trying to do. It's been 2 semesters now that I've had to do purely online classes. And my classes that I normally run as interactional have become kind of experimental classes. And what I found, both for the graduate classes and for the undergraduate classes that have very different purposes. It's getting them to do the tasks that really creates the turning point. So in my graduate class, just on Friday, the other day, we're kind of in a situation where people are a little bit worried about speaking out. So we did this goofy task where they had to, that I was modeling, where they have to pretend they're a Martian and write a postcard about what life on the Earth might be like, and pick one weird thing about the Earth to write a postcard to their Martian friend about. So they did this, and they get back in groups, and it's like a guessing game where the other groups have to guess what each group wrote about. And after something like that, the interactions when we start talking about teaching and these things, they're different because people have kind of opened up as a result of doing that thing. And they're more willing to share, and just a lot more chatter and a lot more things going on in our regular Zoom meeting after doing those types of things. So I think this idea of bringing in and doing these types of bonding type tasks, and all speaking is about bonding. We speak, we use language to create better relationships with other people. That's fundamentally what we're doing with language. People talk about communication and this and that, but at the basis of that is building relationships and good relationships. And if we've done that, then we can do almost anything with them, whether online or offline. But it helps with the online teaching as well. So this is a challenge that, despite some of the limitations that we do have online, it's a challenge that we can overcome. And with careful preparation, with careful planning, knowing how to use these platforms, and particularly in the way that we interact with our students ourselves, and the way we change our interaction is a way forward. And that means, again, going back to our model, we have all these online things that we give our students to help prepare them for what they're going to do during our kind of class time. Right? Things they can do on their own, they can pick up the forms they need, they can get interested, they get background knowledge, they can do all these different things. And then they apply that when they come into the class, and we give them the opportunity to perform as best they can. And for students who don't like doing like outside stuff, they quickly realize that if they do the outside things, it enhances their own experience. And we're all looking for good experiences. Who likes failing? Who likes feeling that they have no idea what's going on or that you didn't do your best? Nobody likes that feeling. So if we provide ways for our students to avoid those feelings while still getting them to interact, then all the better. And that's where this blended model kind of comes in. It's still blended in that we're operating different modes all in online settings. Rather than face-to-face and then online, we're doing it all online, but it's still the basic philosophy of blended learning, where we're doing different things and going through different modes with our students to enhance their learning and make learning better. So again, blended learning seems to be a good model forward, and hopefully by doing this now, it will lead to discoveries that we can then apply further into the future, where we can really kind of work through this and find ways to apply this into the future and just make language teaching better. And that means just rediscovering interactions and bringing them to the central point of what we're trying to do with our students. So I think that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.